This is the second time in a row that a Marvel movie's end credit scenes outshine the main film itself. And we would expect to see Sony do that, but for Marvel to do it, that is fascinating. This is a non-spoiler review, don't worry about it, but this movie has two end credit scenes. Be sure to stick around for them because they're the biggest part of the movie. And both introduce two new characters apiece. Listen for the off-camera voice in the second end credit scene, an introduction that is so subtle, it might be too subtle. But anyway, some of you might be countering right now that, hey, the best MCU end credit scene ever, I would say ever, also introduced two new characters. But that was the cherry on top of the Winter Soldier Sundae, where the main film introduced a bunch of new characters itself, as well as had major MCU story developments, particularly regarding S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra. Now, some of you might say, but Grace, Eternals is a movie that introduces a ton of new characters. It's all new. But that's part of the problem. At least as it's presented here, Eternals offers zero MCU development. With the exception of a few name checks, which you've already seen in the advertisements, this is so separate from the rest of the MCU, both in terms of how it looks and feels, but also even the story, that you might as well be watching an entirely different franchise. And at points you might, you will think that you are. It doesn't feel like an MCU movie, and I think in some ways it's not an MCU movie. It's like Chloe Zhao is an extremely gifted student, but didn't understand the assignment, or decided to ignore it and do what interested her instead. And you're like, well, that's lovely, Chloe, but it's not at all what we asked for. I mean, she did make an MCU movie, which explains the blatant references to Star Wars and DC. It fits more with that in many ways, those two properties, than it does Marvel. And by the way, this is not only Kevin Feige's assignment, but he wrote the original assignment. So it's crazy to ignore, you don't ignore an assignment from Kevin Feige, quite frankly. I mean, I think he might have been hypnotized by the visuals she's able to provide and her Oscar wins. Well, she of course had won an Oscar when she made this movie, but, I think he forgot himself. And, Kevin Feige needs to remember that he's the reason that the MCU works and has worked for so long. He should really be somebody who never ignores his instincts. Although, of course, we don't know for sure what he was thinking here. But I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. And I think this trend of directors, producers, in other cases, and actors doing what interests them over what interests fans and is against the best interests of the franchise is not good. And it happens, unfortunately, a lot with female talent. Jack Schaefer in WandaVision made a lot of mistakes that she wouldn't have made if she had more respect for the source material. Patty Jenkins in Wonder Woman 1984. And I would put Chloe Zhao's Eternals in the same category, which means it has some really good stuff in it, but, it's problematic in that regard. And it's not like Chloe Zhao, again, made a bad movie, but I would say that she made a pointless movie, not only in terms of the MCU franchise, but even on its own. Even on its own, I think this movie is largely pointless. And with Kevin Feige's to-do list so long at this point, with fans waiting breathlessly to see their favorite characters return and new characters to be introduced that Disney Marvel now has the rights to, throughout this movie, I was wondering, why are we taking this detour? And a satisfactory answer, I feel, was never given. I think that, except for those two end credit scenes, I feel that this slot, this Marvel release date, would have been better served with other material. And I do feel that the Batman-Superman references are just way too aggressive, as is blatantly copying the Justice League. To be honest, I don't think Chloe Zhao realizes how offensive it is, because again, she's not a comic book person. Although her carelessness, I think, and not realizing it, it's like, it makes it even more offensive that she didn't bother to learn the landscape of the world that she was entering. But Kevin Feige should have known better. The Batman and Superman references should have been cut. They shouldn't have been in this movie. All right, now let's talk about the film itself. And you can see how long it took to get to the movie. And I think that speaks volumes in and of itself. First, I'm going to talk about what I did not care for, and then I will talk about what I did. All right, so the bad. There's too much story here and way too many characters. So as a result, none of it gets properly developed. The deviants and the Celestials particularly getting the short end of the stick. And speaking of the Celestials, Arishem has one of the worst examples of monologuing I've ever seen. The mystery of this movie should have been discovered throughout the course of the film with the audience getting to play along. Instead, it's just plopped into the film in the middle, or maybe 2/3 in, with a monologue accompanied by a montage. I mean, Kevin Feige now has the ability to make 6-hour movies thanks to his incredibly successful foray onto Disney Plus. And I think Eternals, once you see the movie, you're like, this clearly should have been a Disney Plus series. Like, clearly. If they made it at all, I still don't see it. I mean, some of you will be like, it's going to matter eventually. Well, that's great. I look forward to that day. But as of seeing this film, it doesn't seem to matter whatsoever. I guess that it's, continues to add to the Marvel cosmic corner of the MCU, but I think there are better ways to do that would be more invested in the franchise. I also continue to have a bit of a problem with how humanity is treated in this film. I realize that this is a story told from the perspective of the Eternals, but to depict humans as livestock or like ants running around an ant farm on the planet Earth, well, it's not that much fun to watch when you're supposed to be one of those ants. You're like, are you calling me an Ant-Man? What the heck? Oh, Ant-Man. Not as cool as Ant-Man. And speaking of other MCU characters, at one point, most of them were regular humans. So it allows the audience to feel that thanks to the right accident or discovery or calling, you too could be an MCU character, which is great. That's the whole reason franchises and these kind of stories work. That's the whole hero's journey. The hero's journey, you're not born knowing you're going to be a hero. It's something you discover. Hooray! But here the Eternals are our overlords, and they know it, and it's not so much fun to do. To be quite honest with you. And by rooting the Eternals' story and history and linking them to actual legends like mythology, the MCU is making it that all of human history is actually spun from the Eternals, from technological advancements to religion and mythology. And that really undercuts those real-life achievements and the humans who are actually responsible. I know humans have a lot of problems, but we have a lot of good. And, to say that Fastos invented everything that we ever did for humanity is, I think, frustrating. And, I mean, I know it won't bother some of you, but it will bother others. And I think, you can't afford to have a divide like that on what's supposed to be a 4-quadrant blockbuster. And to be honest, the film is very low energy, not just from the way the story is structured and that they don't have enough room to do it properly, but also that Gemma Chan's Circe and Kit Harington's Dane Whitman are supposed to be the heart of the film. Dane Whitman is like hardly in this movie at all. Chan is lovely inside and out, but she continues to get live action roles where she's asked to be passively lovely. This role doesn't challenge her at all, like her amazing voice work in Raya and the Last Dragon. It would be hard to believe it was the same actress. And also her powers are very passive and one of the least interesting of the team. So you're like, why are we focusing on this one? As for her love triangle with Dane and Icarus, since they're 3 of 11 main characters, and there's even more than that, and again, not one of them is, I think, important to the future of the MCU, at least as presented here. But that means the love triangle is only presented in such broad strokes that it's stripped of any raw emotion that would make it interesting or make us root for either coupling. I mean, when you have a sex scene in your movie and it's boring, there's no point in having it. And again, that speaks volumes about the film. Now, right on the line between good and bad is Kumail Nanjiani. He is excellent in this movie. Well, as excellent as anyone can be, considering no one character gets a lot of screen time. If you're seeing this movie for any one actor, you'll be a scooch disappointed when you see how little you actually get of them. But anyway, he brings his trademark humor to the film. He's a bolt of energy, as again, I feel the film desperately needs it. So he's fantastic. He just does such a good job in the movie. But there's also the square jawline in the room, and that's that Nanjiani looks totally different. This comedian has succeeded in turning himself physically into a leading man and action star. He has a whole new face and body. Now, to be fair, some women have basically gotten new bodies and faces for decades thanks to plastic surgery. 2 examples that many of you will know, or at least know of the person, is Megan Fox and Kathy Hilton. But that, again, is plastic surgery. And it's believed that what Nanjiani did was, to say politely, internal. And so one has to wonder the body image issues and potential harm this could cause for men of all ages, because Kumail Nanjiani was able to do this change as a fully fledged adult. It's not something he had to do as an adolescent, who see this movie. I know Kumail Nanjiani doesn't want to talk about his physical transformation. I mean, at first he really did, but then it became not such a great conversation, and now he wants to end it. But he is an example, a shining example for something that is considered by many people not to be a good path to go down. And the fact that he seems to have only positives out of it, I think, is troublesome because other people, I mean, we don't know what's going on with Kumail Nanjiani overall, but I mean, he could cause like significant problems for other people as an example. All right, so it's a really moral dilemma, and it was really on my mind when you see him in the movie. So I think that, that's why I brought it up here. All right, so let's talk about the good. There is some good. And again, there's a lot to think about here. So I think that's in and of itself good. A few of the characters are really cool. Not just the actors who play them, but the VFX work done to bring their powers to life. Richard Madden's Icarus is fantastic. To watch him fly and use his powers is a constant joy. I could have watched a whole movie just of him. He's fantastic. The same goes for Lauren Ridloff as Makari. This is probably the best speedster VFX I have ever seen. She's so cool. And she's, of course, not only a deaf character, but a deaf actress. They don't make a big deal about it, as they shouldn't. It's just part of the story, and it works great. I mean, she's one of the coolest characters. As you can see, I listed her second. She's so awesome. Well, Kumail Nanjiani is in this group as well, but again, there's that other element. But these are my four favorite. Yes, Angelina Jolie. She goes back to the basic building blocks of her career. Gorgeous, action-oriented, and a worldly mother figure. And, that works very well for her. Again, that's what made her famous. So to go back to basics is a great idea for her. And again, her role is also, pretty small, considering her, in comparison to the other times that she's in movies. So she never overstays her welcome either. Maybe that benefits all these characters as well. I want to see more of them because I didn't see very much. And also, I do want to touch on the LGBT family that they have in the movie. And it's nice to see that in a Disney blockbuster, finally. I mean, they had that thing where they had the background kiss at the end of the last Star Wars movie, and you had to really look for it, and you're like, come on, try harder, Disney. The LGBT community is so supportive of Disney across the Disney empire that it's crazy that Disney is not leading the charge of LGBT representation. There's talk of them having to edit this for overseas. I don't know if that's just talk or not, but it would be incredibly offensive for them to do that because there's an on-screen kiss here that is the focus of the shot, and that is a very big deal, particularly for Disney. But there are a lot of LGBT characters coming to the MCU in the next couple of years very quickly. America Chavez, Wiccan and Hulkling. And I have more hope for those characters because this is still not it. Brian Tyree Henry's Phastos is such a peripheral character who comes into play so late in the game. And it's basically Modern Family, by the way, so it's not at all groundbreaking. I still feel that shows like Harley Quinn and Love, Victor are more helpful to the LGBT community at this point because the LGBT characters are the leads of the story and all that entails. I think that's really, really important, and that's the next step in proper LGBT representation. Eternals is also a gorgeous movie with stunning National Geographic level cinematography and VFX elements that are hypnotically beautiful. The world of the Eternals is gorgeous. And while the movie is pretty light on action, again, Wonder Woman 1984 is a good comp on that, it does have 3 big action sequences scattered throughout the movie that scratches that action itch. And when Eternals hits Disney Plus, I will go back and rewatch those 3 sequences at no extra cost, particularly the one in South America, because I would really like to see them again. Maybe some of the Icarus stuff, I would like to revisit my 4 favorite characters, but I'm not too interested in seeing the rest of this again. So, on that note, is Eternals worth seeing in theaters where it's debuting exclusively? If you're at all into the MCU or blockbusters or Hollywood in general, for sure it's worth seeing. It's unique enough, entertaining enough, beautiful enough, and again, a rare example of the MCU making some mistakes that I do feel it's worth seeing once. It's interesting to see Chloe Zhao make a blockbuster and how she does that, and then, for the good and the bad elements. But I would make sure that when you do see Eternals, make sure that's the way that you want to see it. I know some of you will rush out and see it and then have plans to see it again with somebody else. Don't do that, because I suspect when the movie's over, you'll be like, uh-oh, I don't want to watch this again. So make sure you see it in the right theater with the right people in the right setting so that, and maybe you will want to see it again, but just for that insurance, just make sure that you see it the way you ideally want to first, and then, you can decide if you want to see it again. But if you're not chomping at the bit to see the next MCU installment, or you're still a little reluctant to go to theaters right now, you can easily wait for this to hit PVOD or Disney Plus and watch it then. So that's my non-spoiler review of Eternals, which is basically a screensaver movie. It's gorgeous to look at, it's serene, it gives you a nice feeling, but again, it's a screensaver. It's very, very passive. All right, so share your thoughts down below. Subscribe today. I'm particularly interested to hear your thoughts on the end credit scene situation. And of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.